You briefly mentioned about the implications on Australia. Do you think that there will be anything from this on Australia and jurisdiction and regulation? Because that tends to be an argument among a lot of people right now, where they're coming out and saying, well, this will come to Australia, when really we regulate it by the states here in Australia. It already is how we regulate abortion. So it makes no sense. But what's your perspective? Do you believe there's going to be any type of domino effect onto other Western countries?
Isabella, I think that's it's actually a really good question, because there has been a lot of hysteria in Australia about this. I think every politician, particularly on the Labor side of politics, and I don't know why this is the case, has come out and made some kind of comments about this Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization case. I have no idea why. I mean, you had the French president making commentary on it. And the funny thing is, in most places in Europe, abortion is more restricted than in most US states. It just doesn't make sense how they can come out and make this sort of comment. But also the terrible, terrible arrogance of particularly Australian politicians and pundits to think that they are suddenly US constitutional law experts, that just because a judgment's been sitting on the books for a while, it means it can never be overturned and it's essentially invincible from criticism, is just extremely arrogant for us sitting on this side of the aisle to be talking about. We're not talking about it in an academic way. They're making a political statement about the constitutional rights of American citizens. It is wrong. It just shouldn't be. It shouldn't be treated like that. And in previous times, I don't think any Australian politician would ever have said that. They would have never called out the US Supreme Court like that, because we're talking about essentially the most elite court in the Western world. This is the court. They're interpreting the oldest constitution in our Western hemisphere, essentially. And we have Australian politicians calling them out. But also, we have people manufacturing hysteria that doesn't actually make sense, because our system of government already deals with abortion in the exact same way the Dobbs case sets out. Dobbs says that it's a state issue. In Australia, it is strictly a state issue. We deal with it on a state-by-state basis. And the best example of that, in New South Wales, abortion is legally accessible up to 22 weeks. In Tasmania, it's only accessible up to 16 weeks. I guess the women of Tasmania must be somehow absent a great deal of advocacy or something, because that's been the case for some time. We've been dealing with abortion like this essentially the entire time we've been here. There's never been a constitutional right in Australia to abortion. There's barely a constitutional right in Australia to protest about abortion. There's been a number of cases that have found that people can be restricted by state legislation from protesting outside abortion clinics. And there's been onerous rules that have been set on your ability to protest abortion in Australia that have been completely constitutional. Or protest anything, not just abortion, I should say. But the reality of the situation is it doesn't have any direct legal effect in Australia. There isn't any direct legal effect. Whether it's the overturning, whether it's the precedents, nothing. We don't have a first, we don't have a third, we don't have a fourth, we don't have a fifth, we don't have a ninth, we don't have a 14th Amendment. We have nothing. There is no Bill of Rights. You don't have any constitutional rights effectively in Australia, save for Section 80, a right to a trial by jury, which has been watered down to the point it doesn't apply to 90% of criminal offences, because they're all dealt with by the state governments. I mean, it just doesn't affect, legally speaking, Australia in any significant way. Culturally, of course, there might be an argument to be made that that decision in the US is a pro-life decision, which it isn't really. The majority even said in the case, we reject the calls to ban abortion just as much as we reject calls to protect through a constitutional right abortion, because they've had both. They had amicus briefs coming out the wazoo saying that the right to life should be established as a constitutional right. So abortion should be banned across all 50 states. The US Supreme Court rejected that. The judgment is essentially neutral. It says that abortion is a sticky issue, but it's not a federal constitutional issue. It's a matter for state governments. We have the same thing in Australia. In South Australia, recently, abortion was decriminalised. We now have abortion in South Australia. I think it's up to 22 weeks and 6 days. And in every state, we have abortion after that, subject to, I think, usually it's 2 doctors' approval for medical reasons. So, whether we set the limit, it's low, for example, like Tasmania, 16 weeks, or we go all the way up to the other end of the spectrum, which would be the Northern Territory, 24 weeks. After that, for a health reason, two doctors can approve your abortion, and you can still get one. The only place where abortion is, have at it, is essentially in the ACT, where there's no limit. There's no gestational limit. You can go in there. I'm 38 weeks pregnant and I want an abortion. State by state, territory by territory, the people of each place decide. And at the end of the day, that's the way it should be. It should be a matter for each state to decide. One rule fits all does not work.